Welcome, class. All right, so your second flip video, we're going to talk about lesson 1-3, and we're going to talk not about place value of decimals, but about comparing and ordering decimals. Okay, so lesson 1-3 is how we take decimals and we compare them to each other and put them in order. All right, so let's take a look. We've got two objectives that we need to deal with here. The first objective is to take two decimals and compare them or put them in order by using models. Now there's two principal models that we're going to talk about. The first model is kind of a picture, and it's a grid model. And in a grid model, what we do is we take a whole unit and we treat it like a box. And if we're doing a decimal portion like a tenth, what we'll do is we'll divide this box, and I'm not going to draw this perfectly to scale because that would take too long, but basically we divide the box into 10 columns. And so when we compare one decimal to another, we could literally draw a picture of how many, like 7/10 represents 7 of these stripes filled in and 3 left blank. Again, that's just a rough sketch. There's a very good picture of this on page 13 of your textbook. And so we'll refer to that in class. If you don't have your book home right now, no worries. But tomorrow in class we'll look at that. And it's a nice typewritten picture, and so we'll talk a little bit more about comparing decimals using charts. If we're talking about decimals that are hundredths, we would also add 10 rows to the 10 columns, and now I break my whole square into pieces that are 1/100th of a piece. And so if I wanted to represent a decimal like 0.25, I could fill in 25 of the little squares. And that would leave basically 3/4 of them empty. All right. Now, the second part of using a model to compare models is one that we are going to talk about right now in more depth, and that's using a number line. So if I give you several decimals, maybe a couple decimals, maybe even as many as 5 decimals, and we want to put them in order from least to greatest, using a number line carefully and thoughtfully is a really good trick. So let's take, for instance, an example like the following 6 decimals: 1.76, 1.87, 1.09, 1.91, 1.67, and 1.3. All right. Now, if you look at those decimals, all of those decimals fall between 2 integers, whole numbers. They all fall between 1 and 2. So if I want to model these 6 decimals on a number line, I'm just going to make a number line, and I'm going to zoom in on just from 1 to 2. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and divide up my number line. I'm going to start with a tick mark a little bit off center. I'm going to divide the small piece into 2 pieces, and I'm going to divide the big piece into 3 pieces with 2 little tick marks. And these are going to be my 0.2. So this is going to be 1.2, this is going to be 1.4, 1.6, 1.8, and then all the way up to 2. And let me say a quick thing about decimal points. While I've been making these initial videos, the decimals have come out very fine. You can see this decimal right here is kind of a little bit hard to see. The one up here at 1.76 is a little hard to see. I apologize for that. We'll probably find a little bit better way to use a stylus on this, but in the meantime, look closely and let me know if you're having any trouble seeing the numbers. All right. I'm going to go back and I'm going to switch colors here, and let's go ahead and also add tick marks in between. These will be the odd numbers on my number line. So this would be 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, I'm sorry, 1.5, 1.7, and 1.9. All right, now let's put the various decimals where they belong on this number line. So let's take, I'm going to take this very first one, or actually it's really the very last one, and let's start with that one. 1.3, that's actually pretty easy. That's this pink tick mark right exactly there, and I'm going to put a dot right there. All right, sorry, make it a little easier to see. All right, so that one is where it needs to be. That's 1.3. Okay, what about this first one, 1.76? Well, let's make this just a little bit finer here. 1.76, well, right here is 1.8 over here, and 1.76 is going to be right between the pink mark, which is 1.7, and the 1.8. It's going to be a little bit closer to 1.8, so it's going to basically be right about there. Okay? 1.87, well, the pink mark is 1.9, almost the same idea. This one's going to be right about here. It's a little bit bigger than 1.8, and so that goes right there. Okay? 1.09. And again, that decimal's a little hard to see. Let me make it a little darker. 1.09. Well, 1.09 is a little bit less than 1.1, so that's going to go right here, really close to that pink line, but not quite touching it. 1.91 is a little bit bigger than 1.9, and again, 1.9 is represented by that pink mark. I didn't label all of them because it's a little too hard to see at that point. And actually, this one, well, that's a little hard to see, but that's about where it's going to be. And finally, 1.67. 1.67 is going to fall between 1.6 and 1.7, which is the pink mark, and it's going to be right about there. Okay? Now, going from left to right, we can see that this first point comes from 1.09. That's the smallest decimal. This next one was exactly 1.3. So let's change colors again. So 1.09 comes first. 1.3 was second. The next one was this point right here, and that is 1.67, followed by this point, which is 1.76. That's immediately followed by 1.87, which is right here, and finally 1.91, which is not drawn perfectly. 1.91 ought to be a little bit to the left, kind of where that arrow is pointing. Okay? Now, using this model of 1.91, we can go ahead and write down the correct sequence. So 1.09 was the first one, 1.3 was the second one, the third one was 1.76, followed by 1.87, followed by, oops, I left one out right there, didn't I? 1.67 goes right there, 1.76, 1.87, and finally 1.91. And using a number line, we have now put the numbers in order from least to greatest. All right, a little bit of work, but it's a very good way to deal with that. Now, let's take those exact same numbers and let's look at another way. Objective number 2 is to do the same idea and put numbers into order by looking at their place value. All right, let's start with this example and then we'll go back to those earlier numbers. Okay, now 0.19, 0.04, 0.12, all of those are hundreds. They both have 2 decimals. All 3 of those actually have 2 decimals. Okay, but the last 2 decimals represent thousands. They have 3 decimal places. Now, in order to use place values and to do it quickly and easily, a very important step is going to be to make sure that all of the decimals have the same number of digits in them. So what you're going to do is you're going to look for the ones that are the longest. These 2 here both have 3 decimal places. So all we need to do is fix these first 3 numbers by making sure they have 3 decimal places. And the easy way to do that is to just add a 0 at the end of them. So 0.19 is the same thing as 0.190. 0.04 is the same thing as 0.040. And 0.12 is the same thing as 0.120. Now, I can almost ignore the decimal points, and I'm just going to put these 5 numbers into order. Well, which is the smallest of those numbers? 190, 40, 120, 195, or 132? And clearly, the smallest one is 40. Now, I could put the extra 0 in, or I could just put 0.04. The second number, let's look through the list again, so that one's done. The second number is probably going to be this 120. So 0.120 comes next, and we cross that one out. Again, look through the list, and I see 0.132, followed by 0.190, and then the very last one will be 0.195. And again, now the decimals are in order from least to greatest. If for some reason I want to see the original numbers, I I can easily take off those extra zeros that I added, and I could write the original numbers. But that is not necessary. So using place value, we can make sure that each of the decimals has the same number of places by adding extra zeros, and then we just look through the list and we line them up. Okay, the number of places that each number will have is dictated by the longest decimal. So if we had another decimal in this one that had 4 decimal places, we would add zeros so that it all have 4 decimal places, and then we would line them up. All right, so let's go back to that earlier example. I'm going to need to add a slide here real quickly. All right, so let's go back to the numbers that we had on the number line example. The numbers were, once again, we had 1.76, 1.87, 1.09, 1.91, 1.67, and finally we had 1.3. Alright, now we're going to add, we're going to look through these. They all have a whole number, a decimal point, and then 2 decimal places, except for this one. So we are going to, oops, sorry about that. We're going to squeeze in a, we're going to try. Alright, we're not going to successfully squeeze in a 0 up there, so we're going to rewrite this one as 1.30. Okay, now we can compare all these numbers, and if we do it the second way, using place value, we're going to go ahead and put these numbers, we're going to look through all the place values, and since they all start with 1 point something, we're not going to really even look at that. We're just going to look at the second part, and of all of these numbers, 09, right there is the first, so we're going to write down 1.09. Okay, we're going to cross that one out, just put a nice little line through it. The next one is probably going to be 30, 1.30. And again, we can write the 1.30, or we can take that extra 0 we added, take it right back off. We'll cross that one out, and that's actually the same as that. The next one is 1.67. So we can take that one off, followed by 1.76. And again, we're just counting up. We're looking for the next biggest number each time. 1.87. And finally, 1.91. And again, we get the exact same order we had before. And now we've got the decimals in order. Okay? So that is comparing and ordering decimals. The 3 words I'm going to really want you to remember for this lesson and for all the lessons we learned this year are these 3 words: show your work. Okay, so in this case, showing your work might be to draw out a number line carefully and show me how all of the decimals line up, like we did in the first example. Or it might mean taking all of the numbers that you're given, making sure they're all the same length, and then carefully lining them up from least to greatest. So show your work is going to be our mantra for the whole year, and you probably want to remember that for your daily quiz tomorrow. Sorry that the video ran a little bit long, but I hope you enjoyed. I will see you all in class tomorrow. Take care.